The U.S. government is fighting a legal effort to stop the force feeding of hunger-striking detainees at Guantanamo Bay. Lawyers for several prisoners have appealed to a Washington court to intervene, but the administration says federal judges have no say on what happens at the camp. The mass hunger strike at the notorious U.S. military facility is now entering its sixth month. Nearly two-thirds of the inmates have joined in the protest against alleged mistreatment and detention without trial. It's the largest strike in the camp's 11-year history. Military doctors are force-feeding 45 detainees to keep them alive. The highly controversial practice has been condemned around the world, but is still being defended by U.S. officials, as RT's Gitmo reports.
The UN calls for the U.S. to stop force-feeding Guantanamo hunger strikers. The practice is against international law and is seen by many as a form of torture. And here's why. First, the guards strap the detainee down to a chair, like this one. Then they put a mask over his face so that the detainee can't move, bite, or spit. Then the nurse snakes the feeding tube into nasal cavity. The feeding tube, which is roughly the size of a pen's ink cartridge, or this. Well, this is not an actual feeding tube, but it gives you an idea. And this area is very rich in nerve endings, and patients report extreme pain during the procedure. And the nurse pushes the tube further down the throat, creating a tightness that makes breathing difficult. At that point, patients typically feel pressure on their chest and lungs. Some say it feels like they're drowning. Then the staff tapes the tube to the detainee's nose so that they can't bite or swallow it. And then 2 cans of nutritional substance are being funneled through the tube. Now, we wrote to Guantanamo and asked whether they use an anesthetic for this seemingly painful procedure. Here's their response. Typically not, however, it is available if the detainees request it. Most detainees prefer to use standard olive oil to lubricate the tube. U.S. officials are trying to make it sound like it's not as bad, but here's how one of the detainees, a Yemeni man, Samir Naji al-Hassan Makbel, describes what force-feeding actually feels like.
I will never forget the first time they passed the feeding tube up my nose. I can't describe how painful it is to be force-fed this way. As it was thrust in, it made me feel like throwing up. I wanted to vomit, but I couldn't. There was agony in my chest, throat, and stomach. I had never experienced such pain before. I would not wish this cruel punishment upon anyone.
We also asked the Guantanamo official how many detainees resist the procedure and how many give their consent to it. And he wrote back saying the majority of the detainees report compliantly and do not resist. Detainees are given a choice to eat a hot meal, drink the liquid nutrient, or be enteral fed. The detainees see the choice differently. Take a listen.
When they come to force me into the chair, if I refuse to be tied up, they call the ERF team. So I have no choice. Either I can exercise my right to protest my detention and be beaten up, or I can submit to painful force feeding.
For most people, these detainees are out of sight, out of mind. As sad as it is, they see physical suffering as the only way to draw the world's attention to their plight. We can't hear their voices, but here's what they write.
I'm doing this because I want to know my destiny. I cannot abide not knowing anymore.
I just hope that because of the pain we are suffering, the eyes of the world will once again look to Guantanamo before it is too late.
Indefinite detention is the worst form of torture.
Respect us or kill us. It's your choice. The U.S. must take off its mask and kill us.
The Obama administration doesn't want Guantanamo inmates to die, but neither is it in a rush to give the detainees their lives back. In Washington, I'm Ganesh Chekyan.
The way U.S. medical personnel treat the detainees virtually amounts to malpractice. That's the view of Dr. Frank Arnold.
The regime which the Joint Task Force for Guantanamo has written for the treatment of these people requires truly abusive care and also involves the use of medicines which are dangerous. They are not allowed to behave like doctors and are compelled by the military hierarchy to behave like jailers. In particular, several of them have commented to me through their lawyers that when they ask the doctors, for example, to stop the environmental manipulation which leaves them freezing at night or waking them at night for various disturbances, the doctor says they have no power to do anything. And as one of them said, one of the hunger strikers, what is the point of a doctor like that?
And one of the detainees has written a letter to his lawyer claiming he and other inmates are being sexually assaulted by guards during full body cavity searches every time they leave and enter their cells. Former Gitmo guard Terry Holbrook says some facility staff have been mistreating the Muslim detainees to get revenge for 9/11.
Qurans would be either thrown in a toilet or thrown on the ground or mistreated in some other form, etc. That happened often, and aggressive searches of detainees' persons, that happened as well. If there were a motivation behind it, I would say that somewhere in the backward education of the American society, we led these soldiers to believe that in abusing detainees, it's going to somehow even the score for 9/11. There are soldiers in the Army, in the Navy, Air Force, Marines, etc., who think that if they kill an Arab, if they mistreat a Muslim, if they abuse a detainee, it's going to somehow balance the score for 9/11. And it's not really difficult to step back and realize nothing is going to bring those people back to life.
Amid mounting public and legal pressure, Barack Obama has appointed a new envoy in charge of closing Guantanamo Bay. Clifford Sloan has already toured the prison but made no detailed statements on how and when he intends to shut it down. Meanwhile, Barack Obama has come under fresh fire for not using his own authority to end the notorious history of Gitmo, as Rina Galushka reports.
As president, I have tried to close Gitmo. I transferred 67 detainees to other countries before Congress imposed restrictions to effectively prevent us from either transferring detainees to other countries or imprisoning them here in the United States. These restrictions make no sense.
This statement, coming from the person many refer to as the most powerful man in the world, may sound sincerely frustrated, but many believe it has little honesty to it.
President Obama has been balking on this. He's been claiming that he can't do anything, and that's simply not true. He's operating a drone assassination program, claiming he has the power to do that as President of the United States, and yet somehow he's claiming that he doesn't have the power to close down a military prison, and he's the commander-in-chief of the United States Armed Forces. Isn't that a bit strange?
The official and most often cited reason for not releasing prisoners, even the 86 cleared of all charges, they have no place to go. Especially the so-called indefinite detainees, terror suspects considered too dangerous to let go, but impossible to try in either civil or military court. Largely because evidence supporting claims of their terror activity has allegedly been received through torture and interrogation, which cannot be used as evidence in court. The very existence of these men was shrouded in secrecy, with the U.S. officially revealing their identities only several weeks back, after they had been in detainment for years. Another sign the U.S. isn't really considering shutting down the prison is the amount of money poured into Gitmo. The jail is a record setter, dubbed by some as the most expensive jail in history. Annual cost of the base operation runs at just over $150 million. It means $900,000 per prisoner every year, 18 times the average yearly income of an average American household. The latest innovation at the base, a fiber optic cable to connect it to the U.S. mainland for the sake of better internet service for military personnel stationed on Cuba, will set the taxpayers back another $40 million, should the Congress approve it. Hardly sounds like a necessity if the prison was to be shut down. Then again, there are still those who believe being held at Guantanamo is tantamount to staying at a luxury resort in tropical paradise. One of those is the House Speaker, a vehement opponent of Gitmo's closure.
I don't know that there's a terrorist treated better anywhere in the world than what's happened at Guantanamo. We've spent hundreds of millions of dollars to build a facility that has more comforts than a lot of Americans get.
But those who know what Gitmo is like beg to differ.
Well, maybe they should go and try it. You know, they think it's such a fantastic place. They should try 12 years of indefinite detention and see how much they enjoy it, and perhaps force feeding and or solitary confinement. I mean, we know that prisoner conditions in the United States, which has the largest prisoner population in the whole world, are far from ideal. We see the force feeding going on at Guantanamo Bay, the solitary confinement, the invasive physical searches of prisoners. You have these journalists, you have various other peoples who are allowed to visit Guantanamo Bay, but they never meet the prisoners. They never see the actual conditions that these people are being held in. What the prisoners say about what actually happens there is probably a lot more accurate, since they've been subject to this.
But despite claims that Guantanamo is just short of a vacation camp, perhaps of its exotic location, it remains one of the world's most notorious prisons, where people are held without trial for years, and the conditions are such that inmates choose to go without food for 5 months rather than accept the conditions they're being held in. In Cuba, Irina Galushko, RT.
And John Eisenberg is an attorney for one of the detainees being force-fed at Guantanamo. And he says the protesters are simply trying to get heard by Obama, who does have the authority, I should say, to put an end to the crisis.
They find it very painful. They find it very degrading. They find it humiliating. They are on hunger strike in order to express themselves in the only way available to them, to speak out against their indefinite detention. Many of them are being held in solitary confinement. It's become increasingly difficult for them to communicate with their lawyers. They do not want to die. That's not the reason why they are on hunger strike. They want to be heard. They want to speak out against their force feeding. They want to be either tried or released. President Obama himself, as the commander-in-chief of the United States, he has the power to stop it. We're hoping that he does very soon.
Stay with RT throughout Friday for our special coverage of the mass hunger strike at Guantanamo Bay, which has reached its 150-day mark.
It is not a surprise to me that we've got problems in Guantanamo. During a time of budget cuts, we spend $150 million each year to imprison 166 people. Gitmo has become a symbol around the world for an America that flouts the rule of law.